The lawyer's email contained a single line that would change everything. "Congratulations, Mr. Kade Owens, you are now the sole owner of the settlement of Thornwatch, including all structures, farmland, and resident contracts." Kade stared at his laptop screen in the cramped city apartment he could barely afford, reading the message for the 10th time. He had used the last of his savings, and a loan from his sympathetic uncle to purchase the remote property site unseen, desperate to escape the suffocating urban sprawl that had slowly crushed his spirit after losing his job and watching his relationship crumble into bitter arguments and recriminations. The journey north took 3 days by coach, each mile carrying him further from civilization and deeper into the frontier territories, where human settlements gave way to wilder lands. The other passengers regarded him with curiosity when he mentioned his destination, and one elderly merchant actually crossed his fingers in a warding gesture. "Thornwatch, that is Orc country, boy. You sure you know what you are getting into?" Kade had shrugged off the warning, too focused on the prospect of solitude and peace to care about superstitious frontier tales. He wanted isolation, wanted to be left alone to rebuild himself far from judging eyes and the constant noise of humanity pressing in from all sides. The advertisement had promised a functioning settlement with several buildings and arable land, perfect for someone looking to disappear and start fresh with subsistence farming and quiet contemplation. The coach dropped him at a crossroads marked by a weathered signpost, the driver refusing to go any further up the overgrown track that supposedly led to his new property. Kade shouldered his pack, containing everything he still owned in the world, and began walking. The forest pressed close on either side, ancient oaks and towering pines that filtered the afternoon sunlight into golden shafts. Birds called overhead, and somewhere in the distance he heard the rush of running water. Despite his exhaustion, he felt something in his chest loosen slightly. This was already better than the gray concrete maze he had left behind. 2 hours of walking brought him to a crude wooden arch spanning the path, the name Thornwatch carved into the crossbeam in rough letters. Beyond it, the trees opened into a clearing where several structures stood in various states of repair. A large longhouse dominated the center, its timber walls solid despite obvious age. Smaller buildings clustered around it, what looked like storage sheds, a smokehouse, and a barn with a partially collapsed roof. Fields stretched beyond the buildings, overgrown with weeds but showing signs of past cultivation. Kade let his pack slide from his shoulders and stood surveying his new domain. It needed work, certainly, but the bones were good. He could fix the barn, clear the fields, make this into something functional. The isolation was exactly what he had wanted, no neighbors visible in any direction, just him and the quiet land. He was halfway to the longhouse when he realized he was not alone. 3 figures emerged from the shadows of the building, and Kade's breath caught in his throat as he registered what he was seeing. Orc women, unmistakably tall and powerfully built, with green skin ranging from deep forest shades to lighter sage tones. They wore simple frontier clothing of leather and rough spun cloth, their muscular arms bare. Small tusks curved from their lower jaws, and their pointed ears were pierced with simple bone ornaments. Dark hair fell in braids and loose waves around their faces, as they regarded him with expressions that mingled surprise, suspicion, and something else he could not quite identify. The tallest stepped forward, her build impressively broad-shouldered and strong. She had deep green skin and amber eyes that fixed on him with intense scrutiny. "You are the human who bought this place." Her voice was low and rich, carrying easily across the clearing. Kade found his voice after a moment of stunned silence. "I am," Kade Owens. I received the deed from the previous owner's estate. I did not realize anyone was still living here. We are Mara, Senna, and Kiva, the tall woman said, gesturing to herself and then to her companions. We have lived in Thornwatch for 3 years, working the land under contract with the old man who owned it. He died 6 months ago, and we stayed to maintain the property until a new owner arrived if one ever did. The second woman, slightly shorter but no less powerful in build, had lighter green skin and dark brown eyes that watched him warily. Her tusks were more prominent than Mara's, and scars crossed her forearms, old marks that spoke of hard labor or perhaps combat. This was apparently Senna. The third woman, Kiva, hung back slightly. She was leaner than the others, her build more rangy than bulky, with sharp green eyes and hair so dark it was nearly black. I appreciate you taking care of the place, Kade said carefully, very aware of the tension crackling in the air. He had never been this close to orcs before. In the city they were rare, usually passing through quickly and keeping to themselves. The stories he had heard painted them as dangerous, violent, barely civilized. But these women had been maintaining his property, not destroying it. I am planning to settle here permanently. I want to restore the farm and live quietly. Alone? Senna asked, her tone skeptical. You are one human. This land requires 3 of us to manage properly. I will learn, Kade said, though even as the words left his mouth he realized how naive they sounded. He knew nothing about farming, had spent his entire adult life in the city working as a clerk. The gap between his romantic notions of rural solitude and the reality standing before him suddenly felt enormous. Mara exchanged glances with her companions, some unspoken communication passing between them. The previous owner employed us under formal contract. We receive food, shelter, and a share of the harvest in exchange for our labor. Those contracts are legally binding to the property they transfer with ownership. Kade's mind raced, trying to reconcile this new information with his plans. He had expected to be alone, had been counting on it. But he also had no idea how to make this land productive, and winter would be coming in a few months. I need to see the contracts, but if they are legitimate, I will honor them. I am not looking to cheat anyone. Something shifted in Mara's expression, surprise, perhaps, or reassessment. The documents are in the longhouse. We will show you. Following the 3 orc women into the main building felt surreal, like stepping into a story from one of the frontier adventure novels he had read as a boy. The interior was dim and cool, the air carrying scents of wood smoke and dried herbs. The space was divided into sections by hanging curtains and wooden partitions. A large hearth dominated one wall, and rough-hewn furniture filled the living area. The orc women had clearly been making this place home. He saw personal belongings tucked on shelves, woven blankets draped over chairs, dried flowers hanging from the rafters. Kiva retrieved a leather document case from a wooden chest and handed it to Mara, who spread the papers on the central table. Kade leaned in to read, squinting in the dim light. The contracts were indeed legitimate, stamped and notarized, detailing employment terms for 3 orc laborers for a period of 5 years, in exchange for room, board, and 20% of all harvest yields to be divided among them. These seem fair, Kade said, looking up to meet Mara's gaze. How much time remains on them? 2 more years, Mara replied. We are bound to the land until then, unless you choose to release us, which you have the legal right to do. There was something in her tone, a careful neutrality that made Kade pay closer attention. Do you want to be released? I will not keep anyone here against their will. Senna made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh. And go where? Most human settlements will not employ orcs. Other orc clans will not take us back. We have been living among humans too long, accepted human ways. We are outcasts now. The reality of their situation settled over Kade like a weight. These women were trapped in their own way, caught between two worlds and fully belonging to neither. He knew something about that feeling, about being adrift without a clear place to land. Then we will make this work, he heard himself say. I need help learning to manage this place anyway. We can figure it out together. Kiva spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her companions. You would truly share your home with orcs. Humans usually fear us or despise us. I just want peace and quiet, Kade said honestly. If you are willing to help me make this place functional, I do not care what color your skin is. The three women exchanged those meaningful looks again, and Kade had the distinct impression he had just passed some kind of test without realizing one was being administered. You will take the small room on the east side, Mara said, pointing to a partitioned section. We have been using the western rooms. The longhouse is large enough for all of us if we respect each other's space. That works for me. Kade retrieved his pack from where he had dropped it outside and carried it to the room Mara had indicated. It was small but serviceable, with a narrow bed, a chest for storage, and a single window overlooking the fields. Someone had swept it clean recently and left fresh rushes on the floor. That first evening was awkward, all of them moving around each other with careful courtesy, feeling out the boundaries of this unexpected living arrangement. Senna prepared dinner over the hearth, a thick stew of vegetables and wild mushrooms with chunks of dark bread. They ate in relative silence, Kade hyper-aware of every sound, every glance. The orc women were more graceful than he had expected, their movements economical and precise despite their size and strength. After the meal, Mara laid out the situation plainly. We have been maintaining the essential tasks, tending the kitchen garden, repairing what we could, hunting for meat. But larger projects have been impossible with only 3 of us. The main fields are overgrown, the barn needs serious work, and we have no surplus to trade for supplies. If you truly intend to make this place productive, we need to start planning now for the winter ahead. Kade listened as she detailed the state of the property, the resources they had, and what would be required to get everything functional again. It was overwhelming, far more complex than he had imagined. But there was also something steadying about having concrete problems to solve, tasks to focus on instead of dwelling on the failures he had left behind. Tomorrow, we will start on the barn, he said. Show me what needs to be done, and I will learn. The days that followed were the hardest physical labor Kade had ever experienced. His city-soft hands blistered within hours of beginning work, and muscles he had not known existed screamed in protest every evening. But the orc women proved patient teachers, showing him how to properly use tools, how to judge the soundness of timber, how to brace and repair damaged structures. Senna in particular had a gift for carpentry, her strong hands capable of remarkable precision. Mara coordinated their efforts with the efficiency of a seasoned commander, always thinking 3 steps ahead. Kiva had an uncanny knowledge of the surrounding wilderness, bringing back game from her hunts and knowing exactly which wild plants were safe to harvest. Slowly, grudgingly, the barn began to take shape again. They worked through the warm, late summer days, Kade learning to match the orc women's tireless pace as best he could. They seemed genuinely surprised by his willingness to do the hard work alongside them rather than simply giving orders. He caught them watching him sometimes, their expressions thoughtful. In the evenings, after they had eaten and cleaned up, they would sit by the hearth and talk. Initially, these conversations were stilted, formal exchanges of necessary information. But gradually they began to open up. Kade told them about his life in the city, the slow suffocation he had felt as everything fell apart around him. They told him about orc clan structures, about the rigid hierarchies and constant proving of strength that had made them feel like failures for not fitting the mold. "I was supposed to be a shield maiden," Senna said one night, staring into the fire. "My mother was one of the clan's greatest warriors, but I never wanted to fight and raid. I wanted to build things, create things. Among orcs, that is considered weak, unworthy. My problem was that I asked too many questions," Kiva added, a slight smile playing at her lips. "Orc tradition does not encourage curiosity about the world beyond the clan. When I started spending time near human settlements, learning their ways, the elders declared me corrupted. And I fell in love with a human man," Mara said quietly, her voice carrying an old pain. "He was a trader who came through our territory. We met in secret for months before anyone discovered us. His people rejected him, my people exiled me. He could not handle the ostracism and left me alone in a frontier town with nothing." The silence that followed her confession was heavy with shared understanding. They had all been cast out in different ways, had all come to this remote place seeking something: acceptance, purpose, peace. "I am sorry," Kade said, meaning it. "That must have been incredibly difficult." Mara looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "It taught me that the lines between human and orc matter less than the strength of character within a person. The old man who employed us here understood that. He treated us fairly, with respect. We hoped you might be the same, but we were not certain until you started working beside us instead of above us." Something warm unfurled in Kade's chest at those words. "You have all been more than fair to me. I would be completely lost here without your knowledge and help." As summer faded toward autumn, the awkwardness between them dissolved into something resembling friendship. Kade found himself genuinely enjoying their company, appreciating Senna's dry wit, Kiva's clever observations about the world around them, and Mara's steady leadership. They included him in their evening routines, teaching him orc songs and stories, while he shared human ballads and tales from his childhood. Laughter became common in the longhouse, and more than once Kade realized he felt more at home here than he ever had in the city. The barn was finished as the first leaves began to turn gold. They celebrated with a special meal, Kiva having brought down a young deer that Senna roasted with wild herbs. There was even a bottle of mead that the old owner had left behind, which they shared in small cups. "To Thornwatch," Mara said, raising her cup, "and to unexpected partnerships. To actually having someone who can reach the high shelves," Kiva added with a grin, making the others laugh. She was the shortest of the three women, and Kade had indeed become the designated high-shelf retriever. "To humans who are not afraid of honest work," Senna said, her dark eyes warm as she looked at Kade. "To finding a place to belong," Kade finished, and they drank together. That night, lying in his small room, Kade realized with some surprise that he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy in a way he had not been for years. The work was hard, certainly, and his hands were permanently calloused now. But there was satisfaction in it, in watching the property improve through their combined efforts, in sharing meals and stories with people who had become friends. The only complication was the other feeling that had been growing steadily alongside the friendship, a warm, insistent attraction that he tried very hard to ignore. It was impossible not to notice how beautiful the three women were. Mara's strength and confidence drew his eye constantly. There was something compelling about the way she moved, the assurance in every gesture. Senna's unexpected gentleness, despite her size, made his heart do strange things, especially when she smiled at him over some shared joke. And Kiva's quick intelligence and the way her eyes lit up when she was excited about some discovery made him want to know everything about her thoughts and feelings. He told himself firmly that these feelings were inappropriate. He was their employer, technically, even if it rarely felt that way. And more importantly, he had come here to be alone, to escape romantic entanglements that only led to pain. Besides, the very idea of a human pursuing orcs was taboo. Society considered such relationships perverse and dangerous, but his heart did not seem to care about any of those logical arguments. The situation became more complicated in early autumn, when they traveled to the nearest trading post to sell some of their preserved venison and Kiva's beautifully tanned hides. It was a full day's journey, and they set out before dawn with their goods loaded on a makeshift travois. The trading post was a rough collection of buildings at a crossroads, serving the scattered frontier settlements. Kade had expected some wariness toward his orc companions, but was unprepared for the outright hostility that greeted them. People stared openly, mothers pulling their children away, men spitting on the ground as they passed. The trader himself, a grizzled man named Hansen, looked at their goods with interest but refused to deal with the orcs directly. "You can negotiate for them," he told Kade. "But I will not speak to their kind." Kade felt anger flash through him, hot and protective. "These women are my business partners. You will address them with respect or we will take our trade elsewhere." Hansen's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with calculation. "Your business partners. That is an interesting arrangement. Word is you bought old Marcus's place. Did not realize he had left such unusual staff behind." "The arrangement is none of your concern," Kade said coldly. "Do you want the goods or not?" They got a fair price in the end, though the entire transaction left a sour taste in Kade's mouth. The walk back to Thornwatch was quiet, the three women subdued in a way he had not seen before. "You did not have to defend us like that," Mara said finally as the sun began to set. "It only makes things harder for you. People will talk, will think worse of you for associating with orcs." "Let them talk," Kade said fiercely. "You have done nothing wrong. The narrow-mindedness of others is not your burden to carry." Senna made a soft sound that might have been surprise or appreciation. "Most humans are not like you." "Most humans are not like you either," Kade pointed out. "We are all strange together, I suppose." That won a small smile from Kiva, and the tension eased slightly. But something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of the external pressures on their unusual household. The incident made Kade more conscious of his growing feelings and the impossibility of acting on them. Society would never accept such a relationship. He would be ostracized completely, and the women would face even worse consequences, violence, perhaps, or legal persecution. Better to bury these emotions and focus on the practical friendship they had built. But the heart, as Kade was learning, did not respond well to logical arguments. The moment everything changed came on a cold evening in mid-autumn. They had been harvesting the kitchen garden, racing against an incoming storm when Kade slipped on wet leaves and fell hard. He heard something in his ankle pop, and pain shot through his leg like fire. The orc women reacted instantly. Senna lifted him as though he weighed nothing and carried him to the longhouse, while Mara gathered the scattered vegetables. Kiva ran ahead to prepare bandages, and a compress of herbs she said would help with swelling. They settled him on his bed, working together with practiced efficiency to remove his boot and examine the injury. Kade gritted his teeth against the pain, trying not to embarrass himself by crying out. His ankle was already swelling badly, the skin turning purple. "It is not broken," Mara said after careful probing that made him hiss. "But you have torn something badly. You will need to stay off it completely for at least 2 weeks." "I cannot," Kade protested. "There is too much work to do before winter." "We will handle it," Senna said firmly. "You are no good to anyone if you cause permanent damage trying to work on an injury like this." Over the following days, Kade was forced into immobility while the three women took over all the tasks. They brought him meals, changed his bandages, kept him company in the evenings after finishing their work. Their care was gentle and attentive, and Kade found himself falling deeper into feelings he could not afford to have. One evening, Mara sat with him while the others prepared dinner. They could hear Senna and Kiva talking in the main room, their voices carrying softly through the partition. "Can I ask you something personal?" Kade said, emboldened by the intimacy of the dimming light and his own vulnerability. "You may ask," Mara replied. "I will decide whether to answer." "Have you ever thought about trying again? With someone new, I mean, after what happened before?" Mara was quiet for a long moment. "I told myself I would not, that it was too dangerous, too painful, but the heart does not always listen to such sensible decisions." She looked at him then, her amber eyes holding his. "Why do you ask?" Kade's mouth went dry. He could deflect, make a joke, retreat from this precipice. But something in him was tired of running from truth. "Because I find myself having feelings I know I should not have. Feelings that could only lead to complications and problems for everyone involved." "What kind of feelings?" Her voice was very soft now. "The kind where I care about three remarkable women far more than is wise or appropriate. Where I think about them constantly and wonder what it might be like if circumstances were different." The words tumbled out in a rush, months of suppression breaking like a dam. "I know it is impossible. I know society would never accept it, that I would be putting all of you in danger by even suggesting such a thing. But you asked, and I am apparently too much of a fool to lie convincingly." The silence that followed felt eternal. Kade could not bear to look at Mara's face, could not stand to see rejection or worse, pity. He had just destroyed the best friendship he had known in years. Then Mara did something completely unexpected. She took his hand in hers, her grip strong and warm. "Kade, look at me." He forced himself to meet her eyes. "You are not alone in having those feelings," she said quietly. "We have all three talked about it, wondered about the impossibility of what we wanted." Kade's heart hammered against his ribs. "What do you mean?" "I mean that we have been falling for you just as you have been falling for us. The way you treat us with respect, the way you work beside us as equals, the way you defended us at the trading post, these things matter. You matter." "But it is impossible," Kade breathed. Society has already cast us out," Mara interrupted gently. "We three have nothing more to lose, but you do, and we would understand if, no." The word came out fierce and sure. "I do not care what society thinks. I came here to escape all those suffocating rules and expectations. If you are saying what I think you are saying, if there is any possibility that this could work." The partition curtain pushed aside and Senna ducked in, followed by Kiva. They must have heard the conversation, and from their expressions, they had been waiting for precisely this moment. "We should be clear about what we are proposing," Senna said, coming to sit on the edge of the bed near Kade's feet, careful of his injury. "Among orcs, it is not uncommon for multiple females to share a mate, particularly in situations where males are scarce or bonds of sisterhood are strong. The three of us have been bonded since we met 5 years ago. We are clan to each other now. We would not ask you to choose between us," Kiva added softly, kneeling beside Mara. "We are a unit, sisters in all but blood. If you want one of us, you must want all of us." Kade looked at the three faces watching him with a mixture of hope and fear, and something clicked into place in his chest. Of course, it would be all of them. He could not imagine trying to separate the feelings he had for each woman. They were interconnected, a braid of affection and attraction and deep respect. "I want all of you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been trying not to, but yes, all three of you." Mara smiled then, a full genuine smile that transformed her face. "Then we will make this work, society be damned. You belong to us now, Kade Owens, and we belong to you." Kiva leaned in and kissed him, her lips warm and soft. It was gentle, tentative, a question being asked. Kade answered by cupping her face with his free hand, deepening the kiss slightly. When they parted, Senna was there, her kiss more confident, almost possessive. Then Mara, her lips claiming his with a sureness that made his head spin. When they finally drew back, all four of them were breathing hard, the air in the small room electric with possibility. "We should take this slowly," Mara said, though she made no move to release Kade's hand. "Make sure this is truly what we all want, not just emotion born of proximity and shared hardship." "I think we have been taking it slowly for months now," Kade pointed out. "I have wanted you for longer than I was willing to admit to myself." "As have we," Senna agreed. "But Mara is right that we should be certain. The path we are choosing will be difficult. Once we commit to this, there is no easy retreat." "I do not want an easy retreat," Kade said firmly. "I want this. I want to build a life here with the three of you, whatever that looks like." They talked late into the night, mapping out what their unusual arrangement might mean. The Orc women explained their cultural concepts of bonding, the expectations and responsibilities involved. Kade shared his own hopes and fears, his past heartbreak and his desire to build something genuine and lasting. They were honest about the challenges they would face, the isolation their choice would require, the possibility that hostile outsiders might cause serious problems. But beneath the practical concerns, there was joy. A giddy, almost disbelieving happiness that they had found each other, that against all odds and social conventions, this strange little family had formed. The next weeks passed in a haze of healing and adjustment. Kade's ankle mended slowly, giving them time to settle into their new dynamic without rushing anything physical. They shared more kisses, tentative touches, quiet moments of affection. The women took turns sitting with him, and he learned their individual quirks and preferences, how Mara loved to have her hair brushed, how Senna would lean into gentle touches like a large cat seeking warmth, how Kiva had a ticklish spot just behind her pointed ears that made her squeak in surprise. By the time Kade could walk without pain, the first snow had fallen, blanketing Thornwatch in pristine white. They had prepared as well as they could for winter, the longhouse repaired and insulated, firewood stacked high, stores of preserved food secured in the cellar. The season would be long and quiet, the four of them mostly confined to the property by weather and snow. Kade could not imagine anything more perfect. The first true challenge to their happiness came in early winter, when a group of human travelers sought shelter during a blizzard. The storm had blown in with vicious speed, and Kade could not in good conscience turn away people who might freeze to death. There were four of them, 3 men and a woman, all looking half frozen and desperate. Mara, Senna, and Kiva retreated to the western rooms without needing to be asked, understanding that their presence might cause conflict. Kade settled the travelers near the hearth with blankets and hot tea, trying not to resent their intrusion. "Thank you for taking us in," the woman said, her teeth still chattering. "We were traveling to Haven Post when the storm hit, thought we were done for." "You are lucky you found this place," Kade said. "The storm is going to be bad. You will need to stay until it passes." One of the men looked around the longhouse with open curiosity. "This is a nice setup you have here. You run this place alone." "I have help," Kade said carefully. "Hired men from the trading post." Another man asked. Before Kade could answer, Senna emerged from the back rooms carrying more blankets. She froze when she saw the strangers, and they stared back at her in shock. "You have orcs living here," the woman gasped. "In your home?" "I do," Kade said firmly, moving to stand beside Senna. "They are my partners in managing this property. Now, do you want those blankets or not?" The travelers exchanged uneasy glances but took the blankets. What choice did they have? The storm raged outside, and this was the only shelter for miles. The next 2 days were tense and uncomfortable. The travelers kept their distance from the orc women, speaking to Kade in low voices about how dangerous it was to trust such creatures, how he was taking terrible risks. He ignored their comments, making his allegiance clear through his actions, sitting with the women at meals, laughing at their jokes, touching them with casual affection that made the travelers increasingly uncomfortable. On the morning the storm finally broke, as the travelers prepared to leave, the leader of their group pulled Kade aside. "I do not know what kind of arrangement you have here, and I do not want to know. But you should understand that people are going to talk about a human living with orcs. It is not natural. It is not right." "Then it is fortunate that I do not particularly care what people think," Kade replied coolly. "Thank you for your concern, but it is unnecessary. Now, the path south should be clear enough for you to reach the trading post by evening if you leave now." After they left, Kade found Mara standing by the window, watching the travelers disappear into the snow-covered forest. "They will spread stories about us," she said quietly. "About you living with 3 orc women in isolation. People will assume the worst." "Let them assume whatever they want," Kade said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back into his embrace, and he felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "We know the truth of what we have here. That is all that matters." But Mara's prediction proved accurate. When they made their next trip to the trading post in late winter to trade for essential supplies they could not produce themselves, the atmosphere was even more hostile than before. People stared openly, and several refused to trade with them at all. Hansen, the trader, looked at Kade with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "So the stories are true," he said. "You are living with those orc females. As what exactly, master? Or something more depraved?" Kade felt Senna tense beside him, her hand moving toward the knife at her belt. He put a calming hand on her arm while fixing Hansen with a cold stare. "Our living arrangements are none of your business. We came to trade fairly. If you are not interested, we will take our business elsewhere." "There is nowhere else for 2 days in any direction," Hansen pointed out smugly. "You will trade with me on my terms or not at all." The terms turned out to be prices 50% higher than they had paid in the fall. It was borderline robbery, but they needed salt, iron nails, and a few other items they simply could not make themselves. Kade paid the inflated prices with gritted teeth, seething at the injustice but powerless to change it. The journey home was quiet, all of them processing the ugly encounter. Kade knew he should probably feel shame or doubt, should question whether the relationship was worth this kind of treatment. But all he felt was anger on behalf of the women he loved, and determination to protect what they had built together. "We could try to be more discreet," Kiva suggested that evening. "Keep our relationship private, present ourselves as merely business associates when we have to deal with outsiders." "No," Mara said firmly. "I spent years hiding my feelings for a human man, pretending our relationship was something shameful that had to be concealed. I will not do that again. If people want to judge us, that is their failing, not ours." "Agreed," Kade said. "I am not ashamed of what we have. I love all 3 of you, and I will not pretend otherwise to make narrow-minded people comfortable." The words hung in the air. It was the first time any of them had said love directly. Senna's eyes widened, and Kiva made a soft sound of surprise. You love us?" Senna asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "You are sure?" "I am absolutely certain," Kade said, looking at each of them in turn. "I love Mara's strength and wisdom, the way she leads us with such confidence. I love Senna's creativity and gentleness, the way she builds beautiful things with her hands. I love Kiva's clever mind and the way she sees the world with such curiosity. I love all of you, individually and together. I love the family we have become." Tears gleamed in Mara's amber eyes. "We love you too. We have for months now, but we're afraid to say it, afraid you might not feel the same depth of emotion." "How could I not?" Kade asked softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me." That night they moved the sleeping arrangements. Cade's small room was abandoned in favor of the largest room in the western section, where they could all be together. It felt right, falling asleep surrounded by the women he loved, their warmth and presence a comfort beyond anything he had imagined. Winter slowly gave way to early spring, and with the warming weather came new challenges. They discovered that several of their stored food supplies had been contaminated with moisture and mold, the result of a small leak they had not noticed during the winter storms. It meant they would need to produce more food this year and find additional sources to trade for before next winter. "We should expand the cultivated fields," Mara said, studying the overgrown land beyond their current garden plots. "If we can clear another 2 acres and plant early crops, we might be able to produce a surplus to trade." "That is an enormous amount of work," Kade pointed out. "Clearing that much land would take months." "Then we start now," Senna said pragmatically, "and we work every day until it is done." It was back-breaking labor, clearing rocks and roots from land that had been wild for years. But they worked together with coordinated efficiency, each person contributing according to their strengths. Cade's carpentry skills had improved enough to build proper fences to keep out deer and other foragers. Senna designed an irrigation system that channeled water from the nearby stream. Kiva scouted the surrounding forest for useful plants that could be transplanted to supplement their crops. They worked from dawn until dusk, falling into bed exhausted each night. But there was satisfaction in it, watching the land transform under their hands. By early summer, they had 2 full acres planted with various crops, grains, vegetables, and even a small plot of flax that Kiva wanted to experiment with processing for fiber. It was during this period of intense work that a different kind of visitor arrived. Kade was repairing a section of fence when he heard voices from the direction of the Longhouse Orc voices, speaking the harsh, guttural language he had heard his companions use occasionally among themselves. He ran back to find 3 male orcs standing in their yard, all of them massive and intimidating in battle harness and war paint. Mara, Senna, and Kiva stood facing them, their postures defensive but not aggressive. "What is happening?" Kade asked, positioning himself beside Mara. "Clan scouts," she said quietly. "From my old tribe. They are far from their usual territory." The largest of the male orcs fixed his pale eyes on Kade, then spoke in accented but understandable human tongue. "This is the human who owns you." "No one owns us," Mara replied sharply in the common language, clearly for Cade's benefit. "We work this land cooperatively." "That is not what we heard," another orc said. "Story has spread that 3 orc females live as slaves and whores to a human male in the far territories. We came to investigate if our exiled clan members had truly fallen so far." Rage flashed through Kade, white-hot and fierce. "You will speak respectfully or leave my land immediately. These women are free and equal partners, and I will not tolerate anyone suggesting otherwise." The lead orc studied him with something that might have been surprise. You defend them. A human defending orcs. I love them, Kade said simply. And I will protect them from anyone who seeks to harm them, regardless of whether those enemies are human or orc. A long, tense silence followed. Then the lead orc did something unexpected. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something. I am Varak. I was shield brother to Mara's father before his death. I came because I heard disturbing rumors, but I see now that the truth is more complex. We have built a life here, Mara said, her voice softer now. We have found belonging and love. We are happy, Varak, truly happy. And you, Senna, Kiva, you share this happiness? Varak asked. Both women nodded and Kiva spoke up. This human treats us better than any orc clan ever did. He values what we bring, does not mock us for being different. We are family now. Varak looked at his companions, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, he turned back to Mara. Then I am glad for you, daughter of my shield brother. Be warned, though there are those who will not view your choices so generously. Both orc clans and human settlements may see you as traitors, abominations. You have chosen a dangerous path. We know, Mara said, but it is our path and we walk it gladly. The orc scouts left after sharing a meal, and Varak surprised them all by giving Mara his blessing before departing. But his warning lingered in the air like smoke. They were not safe from judgment or potential violence. As summer deepened, their crops flourished under careful tending. The expanded fields promised a solid harvest that would see them through the winter with surplus to trade. More importantly, their relationship deepened and solidified. The initial uncertainty and careful boundaries gave way to comfortable intimacy and genuine partnership. Each woman brought something unique to their family. Mara was their rock, the steady presence who kept them organized and focused. Senna's creative problem-solving saved them countless hours of work, and her laugh could lighten the darkest moods. Kiva's knowledge of the natural world kept them safe and well-fed, her hunting and gathering skills invaluable. And Kade found himself transformed by their love. The broken, desperate man who had arrived at Thornwatch months ago barely resembled the person he had become, confident, capable, surrounded by people who valued him for who he was rather than who society expected him to be. But peace, as Kade was learning, was always temporary on the frontier. The trouble came in late summer, just as they were beginning to harvest the early crops. A group of men from a nearby settlement arrived, a dozen of them, armed and hostile. Their leader was a hard-faced man who introduced himself as Magistrate Brennan from Haven Post. "We have received multiple reports about your household," Brennan said without preamble. "Complaints that you are harboring orcs, living in unnatural congress with non-human creatures. This constitutes a moral violation of frontier settlement law." "What law?" Kade demanded. "I own this property legally. I employ workers under legitimate contracts. What we do on our private land is no concern of yours." "It is absolutely our concern when it threatens the moral fabric of human settlements in this region," Brennan replied coldly. "Your perversions set a dangerous example. We are here to remove the orc females from your property and escort them beyond the territorial boundary." "No." Kade planted himself firmly between the men and the longhouse, where he knew Mara, Senna, and Kiva would be listening. "You have no authority here. This is private property and you are trespassing." "Do not make this difficult, boy," Brennan said, his hand moving to the sword at his belt. "We have the numbers and the law on our side." "Actually, you do not." Everyone turned to see Mara emerging from the longhouse, flanked by Senna and Kiva. All three women were armed, Mara with a hunting bow, Senna with a wood-cutting axe, Kiva with a hunting knife. They looked formidable and unafraid. The frontier settlement laws do not actually prohibit interspecies cohabitation or employment, Mara continued calmly. I have read the legal documents thoroughly. What you are doing is harassment based on personal prejudice, not legal authority. Brennan's face flushed red with anger. The law may be unclear, but moral decency is not. You are monsters who have seduced and corrupted a human man. We have done no such thing, Senna said, her voice hard. Kade made his own choices freely. We have forced nothing on him. Regardless, this situation is unacceptable, Brennan insisted. We will be bringing this before the Territorial Council. In the meantime, you orcs will leave this property or be removed by force. Then you will have to go through me, Kade said quietly, because they are not leaving and neither am I. The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air. Brennan's men shifted uneasily, clearly not eager to fight but unwilling to back down in front of their leader. Kade's heart pounded, very aware that they were outnumbered and could be overpowered if it came to violence. Then hoofbeats sounded from the forest path, and another group emerged, but these were orcs, a dozen warriors in travel gear. At their head rode Varak, his expression grim but determined. "What is this?" Brennan demanded, his hand tightening on his sword. "This is me ensuring that my shield brother's daughter and her companions are not harassed by cowards who attack with superior numbers," Varak replied, his accent thick but his words clear. "This property is sovereign land, owned legally. You have no right here." "You orcs have no authority over human affairs," Brennan snarled. "And you humans have no authority over orc clan members who have chosen their own path," Varak countered. "Leave now, while you still can do so peacefully." The two groups faced each other, poised on the edge of violence. Kade held his breath, praying this would not turn into bloodshed. Finally, Brennan stepped back, though his expression was venomous. "This is not over. The council will hear about this and they will take action. You cannot hide behind orc warriors forever." "We are not hiding," Mara said firmly. "We are standing our ground on our own land. If you return with legitimate legal authority, we will address it then. But we will not be bullied or threatened." Brennan and his men retreated, casting dark looks over their shoulders. When they were gone, Kade let out a shaky breath and turned to Varak. "Thank you. How did you know to come?" "We have been watching," Varak admitted. "After our visit, I assigned scouts to keep an eye on your property from a distance. When we saw the group from Haven Post approaching, we came as quickly as we could." "Why?" Kiva asked softly. "Why help us when your clan exiled us?" Varak's expression softened. "Because I failed to stand up for Mara when she was cast out for loving a human. I was a coward who followed clan law instead of my own conscience. I cannot undo that failure, but I can try to make amends now. You have built something good here, something worth protecting." "Will your clan accept your involvement?" Mara asked, concern in her voice. "I will deal with that when necessary," Varak said. "For now, know that you have allies if you need them. The frontier is changing, whether the old ways want to accept it or not. Perhaps it is time for new traditions, new families that bridge the old divisions." After Varak and his warriors departed, the four of them stood in their yard, processing what had just occurred. They had narrowly avoided violence, but the threat was far from over. "Brennan will go to the Territorial Council," Mara said grimly. "He will push for laws that specifically target situations like ours." "Then we fight it legally," Kade replied. "We find a lawyer, we make our case. We have legitimate contracts, legitimate ownership. They cannot just drive us out because they disapprove." "You do not understand human prejudice the way we do," Senna said sadly. "Laws can be changed, twisted to serve whatever purpose the powerful want. We have seen it happen before." "Maybe," Kade acknowledged. "But we are not giving up without a fight. This is our home. We have built this together, and I am not letting anyone take it from us." The following weeks were tense. They continued their work, bringing in the harvest and preparing for winter, but always with one eye on the forest path, watching for threats. Kade spent several days drafting letters to lawyers in the territorial capital, explaining their situation and seeking legal counsel. The response, when it came, was not encouraging. Most lawyers refused to take their case outright, citing the controversial nature and the potential damage to their own reputations. One, however, a woman named Alina Danes, wrote back with cautious interest. "Your case is unusual and will be difficult," her letter read. "But there is a legal argument to be made for property rights and freedom of association. If you are willing to let me represent you, I will do my best. However, you should understand that we may lose. The prejudices against orc-human relationships run deep." It was something, at least. Kade wrote back immediately, accepting her representation and providing all the documentation she requested. As autumn arrived and their first anniversary of living together approached, they tried to find moments of normalcy and joy amid the uncertainty. They celebrated the successful harvest, amazed at how much food they had produced through their combined efforts. The cellar and storehouse were full, and they had surplus goods that would trade well even at inflated prices. One crisp evening, as they sat around the hearth after dinner, Mara surprised Kade by producing a small wrapped bundle. "We have been working on something for you," she said, pressing it into his hands. "A gift to mark the year we have been together." Kade unwrapped the cloth to find a beautifully crafted knife in a tooled leather sheath. The handle was carved from antler, inlaid with symbols he did not recognize. The blade itself was excellent steel, perfectly balanced. "The symbols are orcish," Senna explained. "They represent family, home, and belonging. We all worked on it together. I did the blade work, Kiva carved the handle, and Mara made the sheath." "It is beautiful," Kade said, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, all of you." "There is more," Kiva said softly. "The knife is not just a tool. In orc culture, giving such a weapon is a formal declaration of bonding. We are asking you to be our mate in all ways, recognized and permanent." "Like marriage?" Kade asked. "Similar, but deeper," Mara explained. "Among orcs, bonding is not a legal contract so much as a soul-level commitment. We mark ourselves as belonging to each other permanently. If you accept the knife, you are accepting us as your bondmates for life." Kade looked at the three faces watching him with such hope and love, and he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Yes, I accept. You are already my family, but if there is a way to make that bond recognized by your culture, then I want that. I want everything with you." The celebration that followed was deeply emotional. Each woman explained the bonding ceremony as practiced by their people: the exchange of gifts, the marking of skin with specific symbols, the public declaration before witnesses. Since they had no clan here, they would have to adapt the traditions to their circumstances. "We can ask Varak to officiate," Mara suggested. "He is the closest thing I have to family now, and he has already shown his support for our household." Varak, when they sent word, agreed readily. He arrived a week later with several of his warriors, and they conducted the ceremony in the clearing before the longhouse, as the autumn leaves fell in golden drifts around them. It was unlike any human wedding Kade had ever seen. There were no priests or formal vows. Instead, each woman and Kade exchanged personally crafted gifts. He gave Mara a carefully carved box to hold her treasures, Senna a set of specialized carving tools he had commissioned from the smith at the trading post, and Kiva a book of pressed plants and detailed drawings of every species in their region that he had been compiling for months. Then came the marking. Using a sharp needle and ink made from natural dyes, they each inscribed small symbols on their inner wrists, marks that would fade over time but represented their commitment in this moment. The symbols were the same ones carved into Kade's knife. Family, home, belonging. "You are bound now," Verak declared, his voice carrying the weight of tradition. "One family, one unit, recognized by Orc law and custom. May your bonds prove stronger than any obstacle." His warriors gave a unified roar of approval, and then there was food and drink and celebration that lasted well into the night. It felt right in a way Kade had not anticipated, this blending of Orcish tradition with their own unique circumstances. Winter arrived early that year, fierce and cold. But inside the longhouse, there was warmth and love and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they had faced challenges together and emerged stronger. They were truly bonded now, a family recognized by at least some portion of the world. The legal challenges were still pending. Alina sent regular updates about her arguments before the Territorial Council and the resistance she faced. But somehow the outcome mattered less than it had before. Whatever happened, they would face it together. Late one night, as snow fell softly outside, Kade lay awake with his bondmates sleeping peacefully around him. Mara was pressed against his left side, one strong arm draped across his chest. Senna was curled at his feet, her breathing deep and even. Kiva was tucked under his right arm, her dark hair tickling his shoulder. He thought about the man who had arrived at Thornwatch a year ago, broken and desperate and seeking only isolation. That man would never have imagined this moment, this happiness, this sense of belonging so complete it made his chest ache. "You are thinking too loudly," Mara murmured sleepily. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Kade whispered back. "Everything is right. I was just thinking about how lucky I am." "We are the lucky ones," she corrected gently. "You gave us a home when we had none. You loved us when the world said it was wrong. You stood beside us when you could have walked away to save yourself." "I will never walk away," Kade promised. "This is where I belong, with all of you." "We know," Senna said without opening her eyes, proving she had been awake after all. "You proved it 100 times over. Now stop being sentimental and go to sleep. Morning comes early and those chickens will not feed themselves." Kade laughed softly, recognizing the deflection for what it was Senna's way of handling emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. "Yes, madam. I like when you call me that," she mumbled, already drifting back to sleep. Beside him, Kiva made a soft, contented sound and snuggled closer. And Kade closed his eyes, finally at peace, finally home. Spring brought news from Alina Danes. The Territorial Council had debated their case extensively and had ultimately decided not to pursue specific legislation targeting interspecies households. It was not an enthusiastic endorsement of their situation, but it was enough they would not be forcibly separated, and their property rights were secure. "It helped that I could demonstrate your household's economic productivity," Alina wrote. "The Council is primarily concerned with successful frontier settlements. When I showed them records of your harvest yields and trade income, several members became less interested in the moral arguments. Self-sufficient households are too valuable on the frontier to waste on prejudice, even if many still personally disapprove." It was a pragmatic victory rather than a philosophical one, but Kade would take it. They were safe, at least for now. As the years passed, Thornwatch continued to thrive. Their fields expanded further, and they built additional structures: a proper barn with a loft, a smokehouse, a workshop for Senna's increasingly complex projects. They acquired livestock, starting with chickens, and then adding goats and eventually 2 dairy cows. The property transformed from a neglected frontier homestead into a genuinely prosperous small farm. Their reputation spread, whispered about in frontier settlements as the strange household where a human man lived bonded to 3 orc women. Some people spoke of it with disgust, others with cautious curiosity. Occasionally, other outcasts would appear at their door, people rejected by their own communities seeking proof that alternatives were possible. One such person was a young orc woman who arrived in their 3rd year together, fleeing an arranged mating to a clan warrior she despised. Mara, Senna, and Kiva welcomed her without hesitation, giving her shelter and support until she could figure out her next steps. She stayed for several months, helping with the farm work and slowly healing from the trauma of defying her entire clan. "You gave me hope," she said to Kade before leaving to seek her own path. "Seeing that humans and orcs could live together peacefully, even love each other, it makes me believe other impossible things might also be true." They helped others when they could, always cautiously, always aware that their position remained controversial. But they had proven their household could work, could thrive, and that success spoke louder than prejudice to those willing to listen. In their 4th year, Senna began teaching carpentry to young people from nearby settlements, both human and orc, who wanted to learn skilled trades. It started with one curious teenager and grew into an informal apprenticeship program that brought in additional income and helped bridge some of the cultural divides in the region. Kiva compiled her knowledge of local plants and animals into a comprehensive guide that became valuable to other settlers trying to survive on the frontier. She sold copies at the trading post, and Hansen, who had grudgingly come to respect their success, distributed it to other outposts. Mara coordinated with Varak to establish a neutral trading meeting point between human and orc groups, facilitating commerce that benefited both sides. It was slow, careful work, always threatened by those who preferred old hatreds to new cooperation. But gradually, incrementally, progress happened. And through it all, their bond deepened. They weathered storms together, both literal and metaphorical. They celebrated successes and comforted each other through losses. They learned each other's bodies and hearts with intimate thoroughness, building a relationship that was uniquely theirs. One evening in their 5th year together, as they sat around the hearth after a long day's work, Kiva made an announcement that changed everything again. "I am pregnant," she said quietly. The silence that followed was profound. Then Mara started crying, actual tears streaming down her face, and Senna let out a whoop of joy that probably scared wildlife for miles around. Kade felt like he could not breathe, overwhelmed by a surge of emotion so powerful it rendered him temporarily speechless. "Are you sure?" He finally managed. "Completely sure," Kiva confirmed, smiling through her own tears. "I have known for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before saying anything." "A child," Mara breathed. "A child of mixed blood, human and orc. Do you understand how rare that is? How miraculous?" Kade did not fully understand the significance, but he knew it was important. "Is that unusual? I thought human-orc pairings could produce offspring." "They can, but it is incredibly rare," Senna explained. "The children are usually sterile themselves, and many pregnancies do not come to term. The fact that Kiva conceived at all is remarkable." "We need to take extra precautions," Mara said, already shifting into planning mode. "Find someone with knowledge of mixed blood pregnancies. Make sure Kiva has everything she needs for a healthy delivery." "I am fine," Kiva protested, laughing. "Women have been having babies since the dawn of time. I do not need to be coddled." "You absolutely will be coddled," Senna declared. "We are having a baby, our baby. I reserve the right to fuss as much as I want." The months that followed were simultaneously terrifying and wonderful. They did find a healer, an elderly human woman who had delivered several half-orc children over her long career, and she visited Thornwatch regularly to check on Kiva's progress. The pregnancy proceeded normally, though Kiva's orc constitution meant she suffered less of the traditional discomforts than human women typically experienced. As her belly swelled with new life, the reality of what they had created began to sink in. This child would be a bridge between two worlds, carrying the blood of both humans and orcs. They would face unique challenges, certainly, but they would also have something precious, a family that would love them unconditionally regardless of how the world viewed them. "What if our child is rejected by both humans and orcs?" Kiva asked one night, voicing the fear they all shared. "What if they belong nowhere? Then they will belong here," Kade said firmly, resting his hand on her belly. "With us. We will make sure they know they are loved and valued, no matter what anyone else says. We will raise them to be proud of both heritages," Mara added, "to see their mixed blood as a strength rather than a curse. And we will teach them to build things and hunt and grow food," Senna said practically. "So they have skills no one can take away, regardless of how society treats them." The birth came on a warm spring evening just as the sun was setting. Kiva labored for hours, supported by her bondmates and the experienced healer. Kade held her hand through it all, awed by her strength and courage. When the baby finally emerged with a sharp cry, the healer's eyes widened. "A boy," she announced, wrapping the infant carefully. "And he appears healthy and strong." The baby was perfect, small but robust, with skin a blend of his parents' tones, more olive than green but clearly showing his mixed heritage. He had his mother's pointed ears but his father's eye shape. Tiny tusks were just barely visible in his mouth, smaller than pure orc would have but definitely present. "He is beautiful," Kade whispered, tears streaming down his face as the healer placed his son in his arms. "Absolutely beautiful." They named him Kieran, a name that worked in both human and orcish languages. And as Kade looked at the tiny face of his son, surrounded by the women he loved, he felt something settle deep in his soul. This was what he had been seeking when he fled to Thornwatch, not isolation after all, but belonging. Not escape from the world, but the foundation to build a better one. The first years of Kieran's life were busy and joyful. He grew quickly, showing the robust constitution of his orcish heritage mixed with human curiosity. All four parents doted on him shamelessly, and Varak's clan members who visited treated the boy as something precious and miraculous, living proof that the old barriers could be crossed. When Kieran was 2, Mara discovered she was also pregnant. The joy was intense, but tinged with anxiety. Would they be as fortunate twice? But the pregnancy proceeded smoothly, and 9 months later she delivered a healthy daughter they named Mira. She had her mother's amber eyes and father's facial structure, another beautiful blend of her dual heritage. Over the following years, Senna also bore a child, a daughter named Sarah, with her mother's build and father's brown hair. 3 children, 3 miracles, 3 pieces of evidence that the impossible was not only possible but natural and right. Thornwatch evolved to accommodate the growing family. They built additions to the longhouse, creating separate sleeping areas for the children while maintaining the shared space for the adults. The fields expanded again to support more mouths, and the farm became one of the most productive in the region. The children grew up knowing they were loved completely, and that their mixed heritage was something to be proud of. They learned both human and orcish traditions, spoke both languages, and knew the stories and songs of both cultures. They also grew up seeing their parents work together as equals, solving problems through discussion and cooperation rather than hierarchy and dominance. The world around them was slowly changing too. The success of Thornwatch and other mixed households that began appearing in the frontier regions gradually eroded some of the old prejudices. It was far from universal acceptance. There were still plenty of people who viewed human-orc relationships with disgust or suspicion. But the conversation was shifting, at least in some places. By the time Kieran reached his 10th birthday, he was already helping significantly with farm work, his strength and size exceeding other children his age. Mira was 8 and showing her mother's strategic mind, always thinking ahead and planning. Sarah was 6 and had inherited Senna's creative spirit, constantly building and inventing things from whatever materials she could find. One evening, as the whole family sat around the expanded hearth table for dinner, Kieran asked a question that made all the adults pause. Did you always know you would be together? Or did it take time to figure out? Kade exchanged glances with his bondmates, seeing the same mixture of nostalgia and amusement in their faces. It took time, he said. When I first came here, I was running away from a life that had fallen apart. I thought I wanted to be alone. And we thought all humans would be like the ones who had rejected us before, Mara added. We did not expect to find one who would treat us as equals. So how did you know? Mira pressed. When did you decide you loved each other? It was not one moment, Senna explained. It was many small moments building on each other, acts of kindness, shared work, learning to trust. Love grew slowly, like plants in a garden. We were terrified at first, Kiva admitted, knowing that society would judge us harshly for what we felt. But eventually we realized that living honestly together was worth more than hiding to please people who would never accept us anyway. Some people still do not accept you, Kieran pointed out. He had already experienced prejudice during trips to the trading post, other children calling him names and adults looking at his family with disapproval. No, they do not, Kade agreed. And that is difficult and painful. But we built something good here, something strong. We have each other, we have love, we have a life that brings us joy. That matters more than the opinions of people who refuse to see past their prejudices. When you are older, you will have to make your own choices about how you navigate the world, Mara said gently. Whether you identify more with human culture or orc culture or forge your own path. But know that you will always have a home here, and family who loves you exactly as you are. Sarah, who had been mostly focused on her dinner, looked up with a serious expression. I am going to build a whole city where everyone can live together. Humans and orcs and anyone else who wants to come. And there will be rules that say people have to be nice to each other. The adults smiled at the ambitious childhood declaration. But there was also something profound in it, a hope that the next generation might build the world differently than their elders had. As the children grew into teenagers and young adults, they each found their own paths. Kieran became a bridge builder in the most literal sense, learning engineering and construction to connect remote frontier settlements with roads and bridges that facilitated trade and communication. His mixed heritage, once seen as a disadvantage, became an asset. He could move between human and orc communities with relative ease, trusted by both to some degree, because he was part of both. Mira followed her mother's footsteps into leadership and negotiation, eventually becoming a mediator who helped resolve disputes between human and orc groups in the frontier territories. Her calm strategic mind and ability to see multiple perspectives made her invaluable. Sarah combined Senna's craftsmanship with Kiva's knowledge of the natural world to develop innovative farming techniques and tools that improved life throughout the region. She published guides and taught workshops, spreading practical knowledge that helped frontier families thrive. All three children eventually partnered and bonded themselves, Kieran with a human woman who loved him for exactly who he was, Mira with an orc warrior who appreciated her brilliance, and Sarah with a mixed heritage man she met at one of her workshops. The family continued to expand, the next generation another step toward a world where the old divisions mattered less. Through it all, the original four bondmates remained the heart of Thornwatch. They aged together, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work but their connection as strong as ever. Mara's hair went gray at the temples, and Kade's back grew stiff on cold mornings. Senna developed wrinkles around her eyes from a lifetime of smiling, and Kiva's hands became gnarled from decades of skilled labor. But they still worked the land together, still sat around the hearth in the evenings sharing stories and laughter. The love that had seemed so impossible in the beginning had proven to be the most enduring thing in their lives. One evening, in their 30th year together, Kade sat on the porch of the expanded longhouse, watching the sun set over fields worked by 3 generations of their family. Mara came to sit beside him, her shoulder pressing companionably against his. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Giving up the possibility of a conventional human life to bond with us?" Kade turned to look at her, at the strong, beautiful woman who had been his partner for 3 decades. "Never. Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I could never have imagined, full of love and purpose and family. You gave me home. You gave us the same," Mara said softly. "A place to belong when the world said we should not exist. A love that proved the old prejudices wrong." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside the longhouse, they could hear Senna and Kiva preparing dinner, their voices mixing with the chatter of grandchildren who had come to visit. This was what Kade had bought when he purchased a remote orc village to live alone, though he had not known it at the time. Not isolation, but connection. Not escape, but purpose. Not loneliness, but a family that transcended every boundary society had tried to impose. 3 orc women had said, "You belong to us now." And in belonging to them, he had finally found himself. In building a life together, they had built something that would last far beyond their own years, a legacy of love and courage that would ripple through generations. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Kade felt Mara's hand slip into his, warm and solid and real. Inside, Senna called that dinner was ready, and Kiva's laugh rang out at some joke one of the grandchildren had made. Kade stood, pulling Mara to her feet, and they walked together back into the golden light of the longhouse. Back to family, back to love, back to the home they had made from an impossible dream. Behind them, Thornwatch stood solid and enduring against the night, its windows glowing with warmth and life. A beacon in the wilderness, proving that love could cross any divide, that family could be chosen and forged rather than simply inherited, and that the bravest thing anyone could do was to live honestly and love without fear. The story of the human who bought a remote orc village and ended up building a dynasty had become legend in the frontier territories, told around fires and in trading posts across the region. Some versions were embellished, others simplified, but the heart of the tale remained true: 4 people who should never have found each other according to society's rules, who built a love and a life that changed the world around them simply by existing. And at the center of it all, in a longhouse surrounded by thriving fields and filled with the noise of family, 4 bondmates sat down to dinner together. Still partners, still lovers, still friends after 30 years of facing the world side by side. Kade looked around the table at the faces he loved most in the world: Mara's steady strength, Senna's quiet creativity, Kiva's fierce intelligence, and the children and grandchildren who carried their legacy forward. His heart was so full it almost hurt. "What are you thinking?" Kiva asked, noticing his expression. "That I am the luckiest man who ever lived," Kade replied honestly, "and that I would choose this life, choose all of you 1,000 times over." "Well, obviously," Senna said with mock seriousness, "we are amazing." Everyone laughed, and the moment of sentiment passed into the comfortable chaos of family dinner. But the truth remained. Solid and unshakable, they had found each other against impossible odds, had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts, and had created a future brighter than any of them could have imagined. Years later, when Kade was an old man with white hair and joints that creaked in the cold, he would sit on that same porch and watch his great-grandchildren playing in the yard. By then, mixed heritage families were no longer quite so unusual in the frontier regions. The walls between human and orc communities had not completely fallen, but they had lowered enough that love and partnership across those lines was possible without quite so much struggle. He liked to think that he and his bondmates had played some small part in that change. That by simply living their lives openly and honestly, they had helped prove that the old prejudices were not only wrong but foolish, that people were people regardless of their skin color or the shape of their ears, and that love recognized no boundaries except those artificially imposed by fear. On one of those late afternoons, surrounded by family and feeling the peaceful satisfaction of a life well lived, Kade closed his eyes and let the sounds of home wash over him. Somewhere nearby, Mara was teaching a granddaughter to properly string a bow. Senna's laugh carried from the workshop where she was showing a grandson her latest invention. Kiva's voice drifted from the garden, explaining the properties of different herbs to an eager crowd of children. This was what home sounded like. This was what love looked like across decades. This was what happened when you chose courage over fear, connection over isolation, and built your life according to truth rather than society's restrictions. Kade had come to Thornwatch seeking escape and solitude, and instead had found everything he never knew he needed. 3 orc women had claimed him as their own, and in that claiming had saved him from the loneliness that would have consumed him. He opened his eyes and looked out at the land they had worked together for so long, transformed from neglected frontier property into thriving farmstead and home to multiple generations. The setting sun painted everything in warm golden light, beautiful and peaceful. "You belong to us now," Mara had said all those years ago, and it had been both claim and promise. Kade had belonged to them and they to him, through decades of joy and challenge, triumph and loss. They had built belonging together, forged it from determination and love, and the stubborn refusal to let the world's prejudices dictate their happiness. And here, in this place they had made home, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. Kade knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. Every step that had led him here, every challenge they had faced, every moment of courage it had taken to live honestly, it had all been worth it. He belonged to them, and they to him, and together they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A legacy of love that crossed boundaries, broke down walls, and proved that family could be anything you chose to make it. As the sun sank below the horizon and the stars emerged overhead, Kade smiled. His bondmates would call him in for dinner soon, and they would gather around the table one more time, still together after all these years. Still home.